Okay, so you wanted to really make sense of these Jeffrey Epstein files, cut through all the noise and get to what matters without feeling completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing today on the deep dive.
All right, let's do it.
We're going to kind of give you like a guided tour through the key revelations, the connections that raise eyebrows and those lingering questions that still haven't been answered.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Our mission here is simple. We want to distill, those really important insights about Epstein's network and his activities.
Right.
And we're going to pay special attention to the powerful individuals involved and, the big question of accountability.
Yeah, accountability is a big one because it's like, who is actually going to be, held responsible here?
Right. And are they?
Exactly.
Now, just to be clear, when we say Epstein files, we're not talking about like a single document or anything.
No.
It's really a collection of releases from different official sources.
Yeah, you've got portions of the FBI investigation, like that Jeffrey Epstein Part 01 of 22 thing.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And then various releases from the DOJ as well. Things like those flight logs, that infamous contact book everyone's talking about, even lists of people who apparently gave massages.
Wow, so it's a lot to sift through.
Oh, yeah, it's a lot. It's a multifaceted picture we're going to try to build here.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. What kind of information is jumping out from these files? What's catching your eye?
I mean, the flight logs are probably the most eye-catching.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
They're from Epstein's private jet, of course, nicknamed the Lolita Express.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And when you see names like former presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump in there.
Yeah, supermodel Naomi Campbell.
Right, and Prince Andrew. It's a lot of very recognizable people.
It is, and it kind of makes you think about the extent to which Epstein was embedded in those circles.
Oh, totally. He was right there in the thick of it all.
And it seems like maybe it was calculated?
Well, I mean, yeah, it makes you wonder, if he was strategically trying to surround himself with those types of people to gain influence or, whatever his motives were.
For sure. And then there's that redacted contact book, right? That reveals even more of his connections.
Exactly. You've got Mick Jagger, Michael Jackson,
Alec Baldwin, even Ethel Kennedy.
Yeah, it's a really broad range of names, entertainment, politics.
All different sectors.
All different levels of, society.
Yeah, and beyond those lists, the contacts and travel logs, what about those items that were seized from Epstein's properties? What kind of picture do those paint?
Yeah, that evidence list is pretty disturbing when you really look at it.
Absolutely.
It's like CDs with these suggestive titles, a logbook that might be linked to Little St. James, large sums of cash.
Lots of cash.
Recording equipment, computers, hard drives, massage tables, photo albums.
Yeah, and then even things like handcuffs and a whip.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got seemingly normal stuff like massage tables right next to these really disturbing items like handcuffs.
Yeah, it paints a very unsettling picture.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder what was going on in those places.
Yeah, definitely. So with all of this information, right, all these documents and files, what's the overarching takeaway? What can we actually conclude from all of this?
It's interesting because while these documents provide a lot of detail about Epstein's connections and the kind of environment he created, they don't really reveal much new information beyond what we already knew.
So it's more like confirmation then.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
It's more like officially confirming a lot of what had already come out through previous investigations and reporting.
Okay, so we see all these famous names on the flight logs. But were the visits to Little St. James really limited to just celebrities?
That's a great question. And honestly, the available information suggests that many non-celebrities visited Little St. James too.
Makes sense.
I mean, you've got business executives, political figures, anyone who might have been in Epstein's circle.
Right. And the challenge is that those detailed visitor logs haven't been fully released, so we can't get the complete picture.
Exactly. It's impossible to compile a definitive list at this point.
So just because someone's name appears on a list or they visited the island doesn't mean they did anything wrong.
Right. It just places them within Epstein's orbit at some point in time.
That's a really important distinction.
Totally. And, many individuals whose names have come up have actually stated that their interactions with Epstein were purely professional or social.
Right.
And that they had no knowledge of or involvement in any criminal activities.
Yeah, it's important to keep that in mind as we go through all of this.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about some of these powerful figures specifically. The files do reveal a bit more about their connections to Epstein, don't they? Why don't we start with former President Bill Clinton?
Yeah, the flight logs confirm that he traveled on Epstein's private jet multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's Virginia Giuffre's 2011 testimony, which included a rather disturbing account of Clinton visiting Little St. James with Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and allegedly 2 young girls from New York.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
Right. And she also recounted Epstein reportedly saying that Clinton owes me a favor,
Wow.
which, really suggests the kind of influence Epstein may have had.
Yeah, that's definitely eyebrow-raising. And then you have Prince Andrew, whose association with Epstein has been under such intense scrutiny.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Virginia Giuffre has publicly accused Prince Andrew of forcing her into sexual encounters on 3 separate occasions, including once on Little St. James when she was 17 years old.
Yeah, I remember those allegations.
It's led to, all sorts of legal battles and public outcry.
For sure. And there's also Peter Mandelson, who's a former British politician. What can you tell us about his connection to Epstein?
Well, Peter Mandelson's association with Epstein is definitely noteworthy. In 2019, there were reports claiming that while Mandelson was a UK cabinet minister, he contacted Epstein to help arrange a meeting with Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan.
Interesting.
And what's really fascinating is that an internal JP Morgan report from that same year actually highlighted Epstein's close relationships with both Prince Andrew and Peter Mandelson.
Wow, so even JP Morgan was aware of these connections.
Seems so.
And it's important to remember again that these connections don't necessarily equal wrongdoing.
Of course not.
But the fact that these powerful individuals with such public profiles were in Epstein's circle does raise questions.
Oh, it definitely invites scrutiny, and it makes you think about the kind of power and influence Epstein might have had.
Now, we've been talking a lot about Little St. James, but the Virgin Islands are a whole group of islands.
Yeah, that's true.
Is there any evidence that similar activities might have been happening on other islands in the area?
It's important to state clearly that all the allegations and investigations have focused on Epstein's activities, specifically on Little St. James.
Okay.
There's no real evidence suggesting that similar things were happening on other islands. Little St. James was his primary residence in the Caribbean, and it was the center of all the reported misconduct.
Right.
He did own Great St. James nearby, but the investigations have really zeroed in on Little St. James.
Okay, so we don't have any credible reports or findings indicating similar patterns on other islands.
Not that we know of.
All right, well, that helps to clarify things. Now, there have been some pretty crazy rumors going around.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Things like secret submarine ports on Epstein's islands.
Oh, those, yeah.
And even that Ghislaine Maxwell had a submarine license? What's the truth about all that?
Those are definitely some of the more outlandish rumors that have been circulating.
Yeah, they sound pretty wild.
But there's no real evidence to support any of it. There's no proof of submarine ports on either of his islands. And as for Ghislaine Maxwell having a submarine license, there's nothing in any public records or any verified information to suggest that's true.
So it's basically just internet speculation.
Pretty much. And it just shows how important it is to be careful about what you believe, especially in a case like this where there's so much information and misinformation flying around.
Definitely. Now, we know Epstein's private jet was a major way of getting to his islands.
Right, the Lolita Express.
Exactly. But considering his desire for privacy, it seems likely that there were other ways to get to Little St. James. What are some of the possibilities?
For sure. I mean, besides the jet and his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine.
Right.
Private boats and yachts would have been a pretty discreet way to travel.
Makes sense.
And there was a helicopter landing pad on Little St. James, so helicopters were probably used regularly.
Yeah, for quick trips.
Right, from nearby islands or even the mainland. And it's also possible he had deals with smaller secluded airstrips in the region for private planes.
Interesting. So the submarine rumors are probably just rumors.
Most likely.
Yeah.
The most probable alternatives were boats and helicopters.
Now, speaking of islands, who else owns islands in the Virgin Islands? Is it mostly celebrities who have these private retreats?
Well, there's some big names who own islands there.
Yeah.
For example, Richard Branson owns Necker Island and Mosquito Island in the British Virgin Islands.
Oh, wow.
And those are both luxury resorts. Yeah. And then there's Livongo Cay in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is another island that's been turned into a private resort. And Guana Island in the BVI is another well-known private island.
So it's not just Epstein who had this idea.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And of course, Epstein's Islands, Great and Little St. James, were recently sold with plans for resort development.
Oh, wow. So they're going to turn those into resorts.
That's the plan. But even with those celebrity-owned islands, most private island owners in the Virgin Islands are actually just wealthy individuals, investors, or companies.
So they're just looking for privacy.
Yeah, they want that seclusion and exclusivity that comes with owning an entire island.
Yeah, I can see the appeal. So would you say that owning one of these islands puts you in like a super elite category?
Oh, definitely. The term elite is very accurate. The people who own islands in the Virgin Islands are typically extremely wealthy. They're successful business leaders, investors, or they inherited a lot of money. And these islands can serve all sorts of purposes. Personal retreats, family compounds, business ventures, places to host exclusive gatherings.
Wow.
The main appeal is the privacy and control that comes with owning such a secluded piece of property.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about those reports that Epstein was secretly recording his guests,
Oh yeah, those are disturbing.
especially during encounters with women at his properties. What do we know about these allegations?
There have been many reports and allegations suggesting that Epstein was using hidden cameras to record these encounters.
Wow.
And the implication is that he might have been doing it for blackmail or leverage.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's a disturbing thought.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to remember that these are still just allegations.
Right.
There's no concrete, publicly disclosed evidence that proves these recordings actually exist or that they were used in that way.
So it's still speculation at this point.
Exactly. But these claims are a big part of the overall narrative surrounding Epstein and the investigation. So it's definitely something to be aware of.
Definitely. Now here's another theory that's really captured the public's imagination. The idea that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell weren't working alone, but were potentially part of a larger operation, maybe even gathering compromising material on powerful people for intelligence agencies or other shadowy groups. What do you make of this theory?
Well, it's a theory that has resonated with a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
It does. It's fueled by, the strangeness of Epstein's connections and all the unanswered questions about his activities.
Yeah.
The idea that they might have been systematically collecting dirt on powerful people, maybe for intelligence agencies or criminal organizations or some other elite group, is a big point of speculation.
Yeah, for sure.
There are a few things that contribute to this theory. For one thing, there have been accounts from people who claim they saw hidden cameras at Epstein's properties.
So maybe it was a surveillance setup?
Possibly. And then there are the connections that both Epstein and Maxwell had to people with alleged ties to intelligence agencies. Epstein was associated with Ehud Barak, who's a former Israeli prime minister with a military intelligence background.
Right.
And then there are those long-standing rumors about Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, and his alleged connections to intelligence services.
And of course, there's that highly unusual plea deal Epstein got in 2008.
Right, that fueled a lot of suspicion that powerful forces were protecting him.
Definitely. And then his death in custody, which was officially ruled a suicide, just added more fuel to the fire.
Totally. People started speculating that he was silenced before he could reveal anything damaging.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when people talk about this theory, who are some of the groups they suspect might be involved?
Well, you hear names like the CIA, Mossad, MI6.
Those are some serious agencies.
They are. And then there are various powerful business interests that might have benefited from having leverage over political and economic leaders.
It's a scary thought.
It is. But despite all the speculation and those intriguing connections, we still don't have any solid proof to back up this theory.
So it's a big question mark.
Now,
Now let's talk about something that I know is bothering a lot of people. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted and imprisoned for her role in all of this.
right.
But the people who were allegedly her clients haven't faced any charges.
Yeah, it's a huge discrepancy.
It is. How can we explain this disparity in justice?
You've hit on what's probably the most frustrating and troubling aspect of this whole situation.
Yeah, it feels so unfair.
It does. Maxwell was found guilty of some very serious crimes related to the trafficking and abuse of minors.
Right.
But the individuals who allegedly took part in those acts with the victims haven't been charged or even publicly identified.
It's like they got away with it.
Well, there are a few possible explanations for this lack of prosecution. One possibility is that evidence has been sealed to protect powerful people.
So there could be information out there that we don't know about.
Exactly. Throughout Maxwell's trial and the investigation, lots of documents and names have been kept secret. It's possible that the justice system is intentionally shielding high-profile individuals from public exposure and potential legal consequences.
Even though they might be implicated.
Right, and even with the release of those Epstein files, which revealed some previously redacted names,
Right, remember that.
no new criminal cases have been brought against those individuals.
So it hasn't really led to anything?
Not yet. Another possible explanation is that prosecutors might have focused on Maxwell first, because she was a key facilitator in the whole network.
So they were going after the organizer first.
Yeah, maybe with the into going after others later. But, her conviction happened in 2021, and we still haven't seen any arrests of alleged clients.
Yeah, that's a long time to wait.
It is. And it's led a lot of people to suspect that there are deeper issues at play.
Like maybe a cover-up?
Potentially. We also have to consider the uncomfortable reality of fear and corruption.
Yeah, Epstein had connections everywhere.
He did. He was deeply connected in politics, finance, law enforcement.
So it's possible that some powerful figures are being protected because exposing them could have huge consequences.
It's definitely possible. Imagine the fallout if a major political figure or a business leader was suddenly implicated in this.
Yeah, it could be devastating.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of the victims themselves.
Oh, right.
Some survivors, like Virginia Giuffre, have bravely come forward and named names.
Yeah, she's been really courageous.
She has. But many other victims may have chosen to stay silent, maybe out of fear of retaliation, or because they're bound by legal agreements like NDAs or settlements.
So they might be afraid to speak out.
Absolutely. It's a really difficult situation for them.
So the release of the Epstein files has shed some light on names, but it hasn't led to any new charges.
Not yet, anyway.
The big question is, will anyone else be held accountable, or is this the end of the road?
Yeah, that's a million-dollar question.
It really reinforces that idea that no one should be above the law.
Hmm.
But, like one of our listeners said, money talks.
It often does.
And if these big names never face consequences, it does look like a cover-up.
It definitely creates that.
And we've seen similar concerns in other high-profile situations involving powerful people in Hollywood in the business world.
Yeah, it seems like a recurring theme.
It often feels like it comes down to who you know and how much influence you have.
I think that sentiment is completely valid.
Yeah.
And it reflects a very real concern about fairness in the justice system.
Yeah. Does money buy you a different kind of justice?
I mean, in an ideal world, everyone involved in the alleged trafficking ring would face the same consequences.
Right, regardless of their status.
Exactly. But the reality is that Maxwell is in prison, and many of her alleged clients are still out there living their lives.
It's hard to swallow.
It is. And it feeds into that perception that wealth and influence can shield people from accountability.
And the wealthiest and most powerful people have access to the best lawyers, the best connections. They can control the narrative.
Right. They have the resources to protect themselves in ways that most people don't.
And when you have so many high-profile individuals involved, there's often a collective interest in keeping things quiet.
Nobody wants a scandal that could bring down the whole house of cards.
And historically, we've seen this happen time and time again.
Over and over.
The lower-level people might get punished, but the people at the top often escape unscathed.
It's a pattern that's hard to ignore.
So if we don't see any further prosecutions of these prominent figures in the Epstein case, it's going to reinforce that very troubling idea that there's one system of justice for the elite.
Right, and another one for everyone else.
And it makes you wonder about the true power of these networks and how they manage to stay protected.
Definitely.
So for you, our listener, this deep dive into the Epstein files has given us a closer look at his vast network.
Right.
And it's confirmed his ties to powerful people.
Absolutely.
But it hasn't really revealed any new incriminating information that could be used against those individuals legally.
True.
And the fact that Maxwell is in prison while her alleged clients are free remains a huge concern.
It's a major source of frustration for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it fuels that speculation about whether wealth and power can really buy you a different kind of justice.
And that leads to a final thought for you to consider.
Okay.
When you think about what has been revealed in these files, and maybe more importantly, what hasn't been revealed or acted upon legally.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about the nature of power and accountability in our society? What questions does this leave you with about how these networks operate and how they might be shielded from real transparency and justice?
That's something to think about.
It is. It's a big question with no easy answers.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more explorations of the news and events that matter.
See you next time.